Hello, good morning everyone. So I'll be presenting briefly some applications or concepts in relation to air quality as was discussed earlier. Okay, so the topics of my presentation include the significant impacts of urban heat island in relation to air quality, and some of the assessment methods or usual methods used in different cities, especially in the Philippines, and then two case studies I have personally conducted on highly urbanized cities like Metro Manila and Baguio City. So again, from the previous webinars, the researchers have emphasized the effects of UHI. So I'll be sharing here briefly ano ba yung mga effects na mayroong kinalaman or possible na meron ding direct or indirect impacts with air quality. So 3 out of 4 major impacts of UHI identified by the US Environmental Protection Agency are actually related to air quality. First is the increased demand for cooling energy. So alam naman natin as of now that whenever we have increase in temperature dahil sa mga heat-absorbing surfaces na makikita po natin sa mga urban cities like building roofs, walls, concrete parking, lots, and streets, meron din tayong increase in air and surface temperature, or ibig sabihin yung pong init sa ground, lower atmosphere and higher atmosphere. Hence, sa vicinity po natin, mararamdaman din po natin yung init. So, ibig sabihin po nito, we have a greater demand for energy to cool the surface or cool the spaces we are living. So, sa mga residential areas po natin, sa commercial establishments, we always wanted na ma-alleviate yung effects ng init na to. Hence, we use greater or more power or electricity. So, ang kaakibat po na effect naman nito, pagdating sa air quality, whenever we use more energy, meron mas madaming emissions na ilalabas. Whenever we use air conditioning o kaya yung mga electricity generated from our power plants, industrial facilities, and even commercial establishments, in result, magkakaroon po tayo ng maraming buildup of pollutants. So ano ba yung mga pollutants na ito? Pwede yung mga pollutants in terms of sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide. And then mga precursors po ng ozone like nitrogen oxides and suspended particulates. So yung mga parameters po na ito na mga nagko-contribute sa reduction ng air quality natin, ito po yung gusto nating i-measure na merong indirect relationship with the land surface temperature or UHIs. So whenever we have greater emissions on the ground, ibig sabihin po, mas madami rin yung nagiging emissions, mas tumataas rin yung concentrations ng mga air pollutants na to. So the air, whenever we have heat waves or increase in temperature, the air becomes stagnant and traps emitted pollutants sa surface. So hindi na po nakakaangat yung mga pollutants na to. Kaya mas nararamdaman natin na pumapangit yung air quality sa area. So let's say at 10 meters below the ground, yun po yung mas nakikita natin or mas nararamdaman na effect ng UHIs and air quality as well. So this buildup of pollutants results in increases in our surface ozone or other particulates forming yung smog. So ito po yung formation ng smog na example. Sa picture natin, nung time ng ECQ, nakita po natin na maganda yung horizon sa Metro Manila. However, noong mga panahong problematic pa po yung air quality natin, hindi na po nakikita yung horizon. So mas nagpo-form yung smog or mga pollutants sa surface. And then the last effect would be interrelated dun sa mga previous effects, yung compromised human health and comfort. So whenever we have heat events, exacerbated heat events or sudden temperature increases, it can also result in higher mortality rates. So So ibig sabihin mas nagkakasakit po tayo. So associated with thermal discomfort whenever we move within cities ay yung exposure din po natin sa poor air quality. Hence, we have higher risk to respiratory and heart diseases. So ito po yung mga tatlong effects ng UHI na related din po sa ating air quality. So in summary, heat influences atmospheric dynamics and accelerates our air chemical processes. So ganito po yung pinapakitang relationship ng dalawang variables na to. So whenever we have rise in UHI intensity, it affects our outdoor thermal comfort, energy usage, and air quality by different causes. So it may be dahil nagkakaroon po tayo ng mga pagbabago sa weather conditions. So yung panahon po natin kapag meron tayong matinding init tapos mahina po yung hangin, ibig sabihin po at risk din tayo to poor air quality. So hindi po nagdi-disperse ng maayos or natatransport yung mga pollutants, mas nararamdaman po natin siya sa ground. And then next would be because of anthropogenic heat. Dahil po sa mga ginagawa natin sa urban areas natin, depende sa human activities, let's say paggamit po ng mga sasakyan at saka mga industrial facilities. So we have greater emissions na nagagawa or na ibibigay sa environment. Hence, yung effect sa temperature at saka sa air quality, meron din po tayong nararamdaman doon or significant na effect noon. And then lastly, the combined action of urbanization. Pwedeng hindi po directly sa paggamit ng mga vehicles or paggamit ng mga industrial facilities. Pwedeng yung ginagawa po nating development sa ating land use. Whenever we have conversion from one land use to another, let's say from vegetation to built up, meron din po itong impact sa ating outdoor environment, specifically in our thermal environment. So with that, I just want to show you kung paano rin nare-relate tong dalawang specific concepts na to. So UHIs are prevalent in many urban cities, but intensities vary depending on the community. So meaning the extent of its effects depends on how people interact with the physical environment and the climate conditions. So nagkakaroon po tayo ng urban pollution island or mababang air quality or reduction in our air quality whenever there is warmer temperature in our urban area. So may mga studies po na nagsasabi na directly associated to. Whenever we have changes in our surface and air temperature na kasabay po or combined with the specific degree, higher degree of urbanization in our geographical area and also impacts of our local climate and topography, nagko-contribute po ito sa variations sa ating air quality. So on your right diagram, dito po nakaspecify yung mga specific factors na kailangan i-consider. So yung sa mga previous webinars po na present na on our mapping and modeling techniques, we have used these factors. So same din po sa air quality. Whenever we assess our pollution or air pollution in our areas, we also use the same environmental and social factors. So social factors po yung pong ginagawa natin sa cities, yung pag-convert po natin ng land use. So yung urban planning, whenever we convert our vegetation to different surfaces, doon po natin nakukuha yung actual na effect nung ating development or ginagawa sa cities pagdating po sa air quality and also from our urban heat island na effects. So some assessment methods po na ginagawa or mas ini-implement sa ating bansa and sa other foreign cities are these methods. So first is yung gravimetric measurements and optical particle counters. Sorry. So with these methods, we are doing experimental techniques, mga filtering techniques in order to quantify yung cumulative mass ng particulates natin. So let's say mga PM concentrations, particulate matter 2.5, PM1, PM10, usually based on 24-hour sampling scheme. So air quality sensors can also be used. It may be portable, ibig sabihin, pwede pong i-attach into different platforms. Ito po yung usual na ginagamit ng mga agencies natin in monitoring our ambient air temperature, usually fixed. Ibig sabihin, may mga certain positions po siya sa ground na nagbibigay ng 24/7 na 24/7 at 1 second or 1 minute interval na measurements ng ating air quality. And then, pwede rin po siyang ilagay sa different platforms like AUVs or mga drones natin to capture pollutant concentrations instantaneously. Ibig sabihin, at every one point on the ground, every time na nag-move po siya, usually interval of seconds or minutes. And then, other methods naman also involve the use of satellite imageries or remote sensing techniques para makita natin ano ba yung mga spatial and temporal distribution or variation ng mga pollutant concentrations na to in a bigger area, let's say regional or national scale. And then also, kaakibat po nung remote sensing techniques, we can also integrate it with numerical modeling techniques. Magkakaroon tayo ng mga simulations in order to check ano ba yung variations ng mga specific air quality parameters na minomodel natin, which is very similar po dun sa ma-present sa mga local webinars natin wherein meron ding air temperature models and surface temperature models on specific cities to simulate specific site conditions and assumptions of the area. So I'll be presenting case studies na I've personally done para lang po ma-explore yung relationship ng LST or UHIs with different pollutant parameters. For this case, I use in Metro Manila, so the study area is in Metro Manila. I used NO2 to depict yung weekly average concentrations niya from a Sentinel-5P satellite image. So I did this study to show or investigate yung effects ng air quality natin nung nagkaroon po tayo ng mga lockdown or enhanced community quarantine measures. So I did this with my colleague, Professor Ayan Tomandong, to check yung distribution levels ng NO2 weeks before and during ECQ. So as shown here, during weeks before ECQ, so that's 4 weeks, and then on this slide are yung several weeks na during the enhanced community quarantine. So on the top, yung NO2 levels, tapos below po, yung corresponding land surface temperature niya. So to relate this with UHIs, yung LST values are acquired on the same period, tapos ibang satellite image naman po yung ginamit, which is MODIS data. So it has a spatial resolution of 1 by 1 kilometer. While yung sa Sentinel data po dun sa NO2 na relative levels of concentration is given in 3.5 by 7 kilometer na resolution. So magkaiba po yung spectral range na pinagkuhanan ng dalawang to. So in different studies, may mga pinakita pong relationship yung dalawang parameters na to. Specifically, whenever we have higher concentrations sa pollutant, it is correlated with higher LST. Okay, pero for this case, since weekly average lang po yung pinapakita, I guess hindi pa ganun ka-conclusive yung result. So this is just exploratory. So these maps are done to have a comparative discussion between NO2 levels and LST. So ibig sabihin, possible po siya. However, we have to take note different factors to consider. For example, if we wanted to have a comprehensive assessment of the two variables, so these two specific variables only, we need ground measurements to validate the estimates from satellite data. And then in order to determine yung significant or quantify the relationship between the two, we need to check trends through statistical methods and other variables affecting the changes in each. For example, sa LST po, nakita natin na land uses and mga vegetation indices or built-up indices have effects on our LST. So we can also check this along with the variations in our air pollutants. So in a similar study, actually, yung seasonality trends nito can be determined if we have longer periods of data, at least 3 years. So they have used 3 years of worth of data para makita po talaga yung significant na relationship ng dalawang variables. And then another case study is one in Baguio City. This is my graduate thesis relating the or developing the PM10 dispersion model for the Central Business District. So similar to the models presented in our previous webinars, numerical models can also be used to assess air quality in the area. So model applicability depends on the scale, types of parameters that we want to determine, in this case particulate matter, and analyze them dependent on the spatial and temporal na trends, and then your hardware and software capabilities. So typical input to these models include a description of the weather conditions, boundary conditions every time the weather system evolves and depends on the interval that you are going to simulate, and a detailed description of the surface. Yung pag-determine po ng UHI is primarily the same lang nung pag-determine nitong variations in particulate matter, pero may additional factor lang po sa air quality. One is, or that important particular factor is yung emissions po or sources emissions that can be quantified in the area. So for example, in Baguio City, this a specific emission po na quantify is yung vehicular or emissions coming from different vehicles, trucks, sedans, SUVs, etc. that are flying through or along the roads within the Central Business District of Baguio City. So outputs of these models, para saan ba siya magagamit? They can be useful in designing our local ordinances and programs to improve the environment and the use and minimize the use of energy. For example, kapag po sa mga transport planning natin, we can consider different fuel consumption and vehicle routing. So makakatulong po yung model para makita natin saan yung mga specific areas na pwede nating i-prioritize. And then we can also provide recommendations to regulate yung mga burning policies burning activities natin within the urban area, and also yung mga emissions from our industries, mga power plants, commercial establishments, para po ma-regulate or ma-minimize yung use of power and electricity. So both of these models, yung UHIs at air quality models natin, can provide estimate of our climate response and related air quality activities to changes in our surface properties to come up with UHI mitigation scenarios. So I guess this ends my presentation. So if you have questions or further concerns about what I presented earlier, you may send an email. Thank you for attending this webinar.